Well, good morning, everybody. This is a really great occasion in which we're going to discuss an interesting topic, an interesting frame. The session is called The Workforce Behind the Workforce. This is a topic that probably we weren't thinking too much about a few years ago. I remember many Davos meetings where we talked about the importance of jobs. We need more jobs, we need to create jobs, etc. But with COVID, we realized that suddenly we didn't need jobs so much as we needed workers. And in the recent past, we've had very, very tight labor markets. So we need workers, not jobs. We have the jobs, we don't have the workers. And a tight labor market has made us realize that maybe people don't work because they can't, because the conditions are not there for them to be able to work. And they're not able to work because there is no workforce behind their willingness to work. So we need a workforce behind the workforce. We realized in COVID that schools were supposed to teach and so on, but they also take care of our kids. And if schools close, we cannot go to work. And certainly, we rely on that workforce for the workforce to exist. So this is the set of issues that we're going to try to talk to. There is an angle to them that has to do with the nurses, the teachers, the trainers, the people who in some sense create that labor force or sustain that labor force and so on. But, teachers and nurses and doctors and so on, they also have to be able to go to work. So that means that there's some workforce behind their workforce there too. So we all depend on other people doing something for us to be able to work. Now, we're going to we have a really interesting and diverse panel that is going to take very different angles on this question. We have David Edwards, who's the General Secretary of Education International, which is the global association of teachers' unions. And he's based in Belgium. He's very international. He comes from the US. We have Michael Sen, who's the chairman and CEO of Fresenius, which is a very, very large corporation that runs hospitals, dialysis centers, food centers, and builds hospitals and so on. So they're in the care business, and they obviously provide services to a lot of the workforce, and they also need a big workforce that also has to be able to show up to work. We have Karien van Gennep, who's the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Social Affairs and Employment of the Netherlands, and she's also a young global leader.
Was.
Well,
there are many things in life to regret. One is getting older.
No, we don't accept changing the title. Yeah. Always young. And we have Reshma Saujani, who's the founder and CEO of Moms First, which is a very interesting organization that is going to take a different angle on it. Moms are the source of the workforce, and they need to have the degrees of freedom necessary to produce the workforce and also to work. So as you see, we'll take this from different angles. So let me start first with Michael Sen. Michael, you had to go through a very complicated period in which demand for hospital services was completely out of whack, and you had to build, military facilities around to cope with a huge increased demand. At the same time, getting people to work was so difficult and dangerous for them. They were putting their lives on the line in order to be able to provide services to other people. So as you think about extreme situations often make obvious and visible things that are in the background on normal situations, but they're just out of our attention span. So in your mind, what are the key things that we should worry about in terms of assuring that we have the right workforce to have a workforce?
Yes, Richard, thanks for having me and for that question, because the pandemic really was like a magnifying glass on what makes a society work and what is the glue of a society. And by the same token, we realized that if the healthcare system, a very essential infrastructure, a very essential business with very important people, if this doesn't work, the whole system collapses. It does not stop at borders, no matter which country or which system you have. So my perspective of the workforce behind the workforce is actually exactly addressing this segment, because a society and economy can't flourish if that one isn't working. So we saw that this is essential and system relevant, because our nurses, our doctors had to work under tremendous stress and different conditions to provide care. We have factories which provide life-saving medicines. Those people had to work in the factory to provide the world with medicine. So first of all, we need to go beyond applauding these people. I think this happened during COVID and after COVID, but if I listen now, it somehow got to a lower noise. It has to go beyond applause. It has to go into recognition. It has to go, how is the network with the families, how can they come to work? What can companies do? The second thing is we need to take a strategic approach. If you really say a healthcare system and healthcare organizations are system critical, if I look at the numbers globally, we're gonna go from roughly 65 million global healthcare workers in 2020 to 2030, 89. That is a growth rate of more than 30%, while the general population is growing by 8-9%. That means by 2030, we're gonna have a gap of 10 million people. So what are you going to do to address this one, to have a system-relevant workforce behind the workforce? So what I believe we have to do, which is also the topic of the forum, is we have to embrace technology. Wherever technology can help, can augment not only artificial intelligence, but maybe augmented intelligence to bring productivity in the system, but also relieve some burden. The second thing is we also need to look at equality. Because if you look at it at a global scale, what should not happen is that specific countries, which maybe have the means, absorb the workforce, and then other countries are left behind. So there's also an inclusion element globally to that one. And this is how I would start.
Very good, very good. Let me move on to Minister Van Gennep. So you obviously are coming at this question asking what is the right public policy framework to make societies work, to make a workforce that is competent, capable, and so on, that needs to be in some hands produced and taken care of. What do you think are the key elements of public expenditures, public rules, public investment in this area that are fundamental to the achievement of the task?
Thank you for that question. Let me start by saying it's social cohesion, stupid, to paraphrase former American president. But today, it's really about social cohesion. We live in a fragmented world. And investment in health and education both is investment in social cohesion. So you should see those costs, not as a cost, but as an investment. So the smartest investment a society can make is forward-looking and is investing in health and education. And a middle class, a population that has access, affordable access, quality access to health and education is a far more stable society. Because that means that you won't start your career with a burden of your student loan, that you don't have to take a mortgage on your house when you get ill. No, we invest in healthcare and education. And in order to be able to do that, we need to invest in the professionals that work in healthcare and education, in the workers. And that's where cohesion comes in as well. So what do we pay those people? How do we support those people? And how do we indeed go beyond applause? And in order to rebuild trust, in order to rebuild our cohesive societies, we need to face those challenges together. And the big question is, can governments still deliver on their public promises? Can they still deliver accessible, high-quality healthcare and education today to everybody, so that you have perspective in life as a middle class, as a population? And then we have to create the circumstances in which people can actually deploy their talents, in which people can actually enjoy working in healthcare and in education. And that means flexibility, ability to adapt, but that also means security. Because when you feel secure, you dare to take more risk, and that means you dare to invest in yourself. And if we really believe that the bank tellers of today are the nurses of tomorrow, we need to make that transition happen. We're talking about green and digital transitions all the time, one of those many challenges that we need to face as society. But there is also a transition from private jobs, which we still need. We need private companies to make the money to pay for our public services. But we need people to transition out of the jobs that they lose into new jobs. And maybe also into public service jobs. And that transition is as important as the green and the digital transition. But in order to do that, you need not just to re-educate people, a bank teller to a nurse or a school teacher. You also need that finance that year or that half a year of education. And that becomes the big challenge, because you have a mortgage, you have a family to provide for. So who is paying your salary in the year that you are re-educating? That's a big discussion that we're having in the Netherlands right now. How do we make sure we get that smooth transition? But there's also responsibility upon the shoulders of the organizations. Because like in private companies, you need to be good employers. You need to retain your people. You need to make sure that people feel that they have ownership on their jobs. Modern employership, good employership. Self-steering teams, good quality work. All those kind of things you need to bring into the healthcare and in the education system as well. And if I'm honest, if I look at the Netherlands, that's not happening at the same pace yet in some of the public service organizations as it is happening in the private sector.
As it's happening in the private sector. Interesting. Can I ask you, we immediately think of mothers having to take care of children, so daycare centers and so on, to allow mothers to rejoin the labor force and so on. But we also find situations where we have the elderly that have to be taken care of, and that sometimes force families to have to retire from the labor force. Are there ideas, best practices, and so on? How large should this care service business be in your mind?
Yeah, if you look at childcare, we know from the Netherlands that one person working in childcare means 7 other people, 7 parents working in other professions. So we're really investing in childcare and also in career paths in childcare, so that you can actually join as a childcare worker in a junior position and do that education that I was talking about while working over a year or so, and then you become a senior and then you become another professional. So that's a way to attract people into childcare professions, and that's actually starting to work out quite well. As for informal care, I don't have the answer yet. We live in a society where people get older and older, luckily so. My parents are 85. But that also means we live in a society where informal care becomes much and much more demanding for each and every family. And yes, you can do something with AI, yes, you can do something with prevention, you can do something with groups living together. But what we now see is that the group of 45 to 55, those are the parents of young children and the children of older parents, both, that the burnout ratio is really high. And that's one of the challenges we're struggling now today. How are we actually going to accommodate that part, that age group in society, that part in your life, when everything comes together?
That reminds me of the old joke that says that the old people look back, the young look ahead, and middle-aged looks tired.
Yeah.
David Edwards, let me ask you, As the head of an organization as important as the teachers are for all societies, they were put in a really complicated situation with COVID. We could not have the schools open because it would be a transmission mechanism of the disease. I often think of daycare centers as immune system training facilities, where all our kids get cold, get their immune system going. Schools were closed. Teachers were, concerned about joining, not joining. That had an enormous effect on the feasibility of work and other activities in the rest of home. From that experience, what do you think are the takeaways that your organization has been? What are the lessons that you think we learned in that period that you would like to be implemented in the present?
Well, thanks, Professor. I want to thanks for the more than thanks. We have a slogan about more than the clapping, so we say more than thanks. We really appreciate that. I think we've already forgot one of the lessons we learned, unfortunately. And we might have a chance on it. The first one is, and I think I was talking to you earlier about this, I was with a certain tech giant prior to the pandemic, and he was telling me, you and your 32 million members, David, you're going to be out of a job very soon, because I got a way, we're going to put all kids in their bedrooms on screens. We won't need to pay for brick and mortar schools anymore. Schools don't matter. So that was a hypothetical before the pandemic, and it really isn't a hypothetical now. It almost seems like an absurd thing to say, knowing the damage of kids in terms of being on the screen times and things like that. So what we learned was that a place called school matters, right? And for a brief moment, we learned that the people who work there also matter, because there were all these parents trying to help with the homework and calling and trying to relearn algebra so that they could, and going, gosh, there was TV people saying teachers should make millions. I can't believe I can't do this with one, they do this with 40. And so that lesson that they should make more kind of went away too. Teachers globally, we have a global teacher shortage of about 44 million teachers currently if we want to meet the SDG 4. Teachers do not earn, OECD, UNESCO, others, they do not earn commensurate salaries as people who hold the same levels of education. That's even if you have a master's degree, right? So one thing was about the importance of a place called school, the physical place. The other was about their salaries. I think the other thing that we learned was that the place called school is where your students go and they learn socialization. That's where they get the social-emotional learning, the skills, the resilience. And I think what we're heading into right now is a time where children are feeling a great deal of anxiety. Teachers are not being prepared to how to deal with the technology that they have, the kids bring in with them. They could be videotaping them, they could be, taking pictures of each other. And teachers report, the Global Status of Teacher Report shows that teachers report they have less time for actual direct interaction with their students and with their colleagues because they spend so much time doing reporting and sort of bureaucratic work around exams, test scores, all these other things that they have to do. They have lost a sense of professional autonomy. And I think even at universities you feel that, don't you? They have a feeling that the work isn't as interesting and that the problems that the kids are bringing in are just so huge that the workload's high, the salary is low, and the respect is almost absent. So I think the lesson we have to learn is schools matter, teachers matter. They're not behind the workforce. They're in front of the workforce. They're at the chalk face. And they're the profession that creates all other professions. And people want to talk about the rate of return on salaries. Yes, teacher salaries are recurrent expenditures. It's very high. And I want to applaud the Netherlands because it used to be that if you were a primary teacher in the Netherlands, you earned less than if you were a secondary teacher. Now the unions, my members there, with the government, now you've equalized that. The next, if we talk about early childhood though, we have to kind of go beyond this notion of a care babysitting economy, because actual education in the early years is the most important predictor and just most important in terms of not just like the type of life they're going to live, how much they're going to make, but it's how they're going to be and what other teachers are going to then get to build off of in terms of those foundational skills. And so instead of just seeing them as daycare babysitters or schools as sort of holding grounds, particularly in those early years, I think we really need to invest more in early childhood education and pay those people who are paid very poorly globally, not just in the OECD countries, but in the Global Partnership for Education countries too, very, very poorly. So I think we have to make the serious investment. The SDG 4 completely off track. Secretary Guterres he had the Transforming Education Summit calling for 6% of GDP to be invested in education, 15% of social spending, 15 to 20. And there's no country that's even close, really. And I think if you want to talk about climate change, you want to talk about health, you want to talk about democracy, trust for this, what's happening here, those are investments in trust. Those are investments in institutions. Those are investments in the future.
I mean, if you were talking to a finance minister...
Yeah, we do it very differently.
You know, we cannot spend more than 100%. So how would you... What sacrifice do you want society to make so that these expenditures can become affordable?
What's the trade-off that
Yeah,
so I would like, I mean, I think, well, it won't be a surprise to you that I'm a fan of progressive taxation, probably. I mean, that's probably not a very popular topic at the forum, but actually countries that have those, where wealth is distributed so that you have a social contract, and public education is one of the ways in which the social contract can be fulfilled. I mean, think about what's the opposite of that. What does the world look like that doesn't have the education? I can take you to countries where they do exactly that. They say, we just don't have, for real reasons, because they have sovereign debt crisis, or they have, you know, companies that that offshore their profits and don't, you know, support them. So, I mean, I think I'd be willing to sacrifice tax shelters. I'd be willing to sacrifice, I don't know. Yeah, I'll start with tax shelters.
Very good.
May I add something to that? This morning, somebody said, you have to treat investments in healthcare, and I will add education to that, like you treat the investments in defense. Mm-hmm. Where you also say, defense is essential, so is healthcare, and so is education. So if we start to look at it like that and see it as an investment that's essential to how we build societies, that's essential to the question, what kind of societies, economies, jobs do we want to build, then you get to a totally different discussion.
We say if education is expensive, try ignorance.
I understand that, but so let me go back to you for a second and tell me what should we be cutting?
What should we be, sorry?
Cutting to make space for this. How can we create the space for these?
But I do think if you look at it like that, you look at it like a budget from the government, and you say, okay, we're going to give a little bit less subsidies to whatever, housing, and more to education. But if you look like it as an investment, as something that's important, then you look at it much differently. In the Netherlands, we not only increased primary salaries, but we increased the whole salary building for education and in healthcare. By the way, now people are giving back hours because they think they earn enough money. So they do, a couple of them increase their salaries, but many give their hours back so that maybe they can take care of their families. But that's a side effect that we're now trying to understand. And by the way, we banned mobile phones from the classroom. But I think it needs to go back to re-evaluating public service. If you really believe in cohesive societies, if you really believe in the values that we share, you need to re-evaluate public service. Maybe also politics, but at a minimum, education and healthcare.
Very good. Reshma Sojani, you've created this organization called Moms First, as I mentioned before. And I'm reminded that this year we gave the Nobel Prize in Economics to Claudia Goldin, a colleague of ours at Harvard. And she wrote a beautiful book that if you haven't read, you should. It's called Career and Family. And it's 100 years of how professional women in the US had to make the difficult choices of am I going to have a career? Am I going to have a family? At what age am I going to have a family? When do I have my kids? How can I have the kids? And so on. And it's an amazing adventure of really 100 years of enormous change in norms and so on. And I wanted to ask you, you want to make space for motherhood and moms to be feasible,
Yes.
right? And you lobby governments for some policies, and then you lobby the private sector for some policies. Can you tell us what do you think are the critical ingredients to make moms thrive? First of all, as moms, everybody's facing below replacement rate fertility rates,
Yeah.
right? And for them to be able to be effective workers
Yeah.
in the economy.
Well, I mean, going back to Claudia's point, right? Claudia was trying to understand, in the United States, we have the most educated workforce in the world of women, with the least amount of labor market participation. And oftentimes we say that, well, the reason for that is, well, women need more confidence. They just need to lean in a little harder. If they had a mentor, their participation would increase. But what Claudia said is, that's wrong. Actually, what we need to focus on is the structure, is the fact that the United States, we like to tout that we're exceptional. What we are exceptional at is being exceptionally bad at care. We are the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have paid leave. The vast majority of American women go back to work 2 weeks after having a baby. 40% of families in America are in debt because of childcare. We were just talking about the women in your lab, right? We pay more for childcare than we pay for our rent. And this isn't just a phenomenon that's happening in America, it's happening across the globe. I mean, what we're realizing, especially after the pandemic, is that economies simply cannot function without a thriving structure of care because workers can't work without care. And economies are going bankrupt because of this. So there are 606 million women, working age women in the world who are not working because of their unpaid care responsibilities, compared to 40 million men. That is $9 trillion of our global GDP, right? And so the lack of government action on this is putting pressure on the private sector, which we're in tight labor markets, to do something about it. And so at Moms First, we're working with over 130 companies in every single sector, from PayPal in technology to, Morgan Stanley in financial services to JBS Foods in manufacturing, who are saying, I don't have enough workers. And since half the population are women, I need more women who can come in and work, and they can't work because they don't have adequate childcare. And so we are working with them to redesign their childcare packages, to increase their subsidies. But part of the impediment on this, so, across the globe, there are not global multinational companies that are investing in childcare, because when you often talk to people when you're walking around the hallway here, CEOs will say, well, it's just too expensive, right? There's this perception that it's too expensive. There's these questions that people ask, well, what are you going to trade if you pay for childcare? And I, with all due respect, think that that is a ridiculous question. Because, what we've found, and we have a report that's coming out with BCG in a month, is that childcare pays for itself. When you offer childcare to employees, you get higher worker productivity, you get lower rates of attrition, you have greater rates of retention, but the data has not existed. And so, we're excited about the information that we're going to be putting out that is going to kind of prove this once and for all, because we have to stop looking at care as a personal problem that I, as a parent or a mother, has to solve, and as an economic issue that world leaders must actually do something about. And the other thing I want to add that I think we've been working on, which I think is interesting, and we're talking a lot about AI, in this conference here, and in partnership with Sam Altman and OpenAI, Moms First released one of the first ever public sector tools on generative AI, on care, and on paid leave. So we released something called paidleave.ai. So if you are a parent and you live in a state that offers paid leave, you can go to the website and it'll tell you, am I eligible? How much money can I get? And what's my action plan? And the reality is that, less than 20% of people that are eligible for paid leave actually go get it. Because you go to the government website and you're like, I got 10 minutes, I'm really busy, I'm a single mom working in retail, and I can't figure it out. And I give up. And you lose about $10,000 in wages by not actually getting the paid leave that you qualify for. Because, government doesn't do a real good job at customer service. And so we believe, though, that if you actually increase the uptake of paid leave, you not only build a movement of voters and people who recognize the benefits of this. President Clinton used to always say when he goes on airplanes and he would talk to people, they would come up to him and they'd say, the most important law you ever passed was the FMLA. But because of the FMLA, I actually
Can you say what the FMLA is?
Family Medical and Leave Act, which allowed you, if your father was dying, if you had a child who was sick and in the NICU, it allowed you to spend time with them. And so when you give paid leave and benefits like that, it allows you to actually spend that time with your family that you need, and people don't forget that. And in addition to that, it closes, by increasing the uptake of benefits, it closes the poverty gap. We love to talk about AI as worker replacement, basic income, and that's how we're going to do it. But the tool in itself, I think it has other ways of actually closing the income gap and is applicable in so many ways. So my point is that, we have to think about care as an economic issue, as an issue where innovation can actually help solve, and put it into that conversation. And I think we'll do radically different things and have a radically different impact, on productivity and on economic gains.
Let me go to Michael for a second and ask him, as an employer, how big of a headache it is for you to hire the people you need, and many of the people you need are not trainable in a short period. They come from a long pipeline of studies. How are you, and I presume that this is not just about projections of what's going to happen in the future. It's a reality you live in the present. What are you doing to make sure that you get the workforce that you need?
Yeah. This is actually one of the key topics for us going forward, and I think for many companies. But I want to be hands in gloves with Resmaa, saying this is the power what the private sector can and could do. And I'll come in a minute to also what is the trade-off and how much does it cost. Because the one thing our company will need going forward is people. Mm-hmm. That is also today, as I said, during the pandemic, it became very, very clear, the most valuable resource. But it's also going to be, going forward, the most valuable resource. I told you about the 10 million gap we see. And we are in dire need for professional people, on frontline workers, but also on many other jobs on the R&D side, but also factory workers. And this is going to be a battle, a competition also. That's why I said on a global level, we have to also have the framework that there's equality between countries, that you don't absorb from other countries too much. Yet what we do today, we hire exactly for nurses and care workers from other countries. And we have our own programs and are in collaboration with the government and the local municipalities. How can we get them fast into the workforce? What can we do to integrate them at a fast speed? Language learning, housing, the whole 9 yards on red tape is a big, big headache. So we are helping them on that one. It's the most valuable resource because we go beyond applause. We train them, we reskill them, we skill them. We look for environmental health and safety. It became very clear during the pandemic. where the deficiencies are. This was in parts a fatal disease, a lethal disease. And all of this is very dear to our heart, and therefore let me answer a little bit. I think we can only do this in lockstep between the private and the public sector. But there needs to be also a labor of division, because the government sets the framework and the rule. And I would argue you don't need to make a trade-off. You know, if you want to have, let's say, the appreciation even on salaries, I'm talking about healthcare. And what does it mean to be an investment? If you look at it as a social cost, as an expenditure in your public budget, then you're already lost. Because then we all know in most developed countries, healthcare spend in percentage of GDP is way too high, and then you say that can't cost more than. A medication cannot cost more than X. If you look at it, how does a system work? How can we make a healthcare system more efficient? For example, where do we lose money? We lose money by overdiagnosis, wrong treatment, and these are the main factors. So technology can play a role. AI, for example, 50% of our clinical decisions we take today on diagnosis and treatment that may scare you are still unprecise. So if we get more precision on that one, we can reduce the cost of the overall healthcare system. If a company provides affordable medicine and makes the prices more competitive than maybe the innovator, then it needs to be also, you know, appreciated and get the support. We cannot get the price from 100 to 0, then nobody's gonna invest into this one. So we're gonna embrace technology, we're gonna look at healthcare as an industrial sector, and then the private sector will find its ways if the regulatory framework allows for it. Because as Reshma said, we are also interested. We're doing things that we are offering childcare on site because we want them to feel comfortable. And we will invest into this one. But I need to look at the return, and not only at the social return, from an overall systemic point of view.
May I add?
Sure.
It's something on the discussion on mothers going to work.
Yeah.
Because there is a responsibility for the government to put the different leave systems in place. And we have many of those in the Netherlands, actually so many it's now too complex. And it means that we have a very high participation of women, but almost all work part-time. There's a responsibility for employers to put the different systems in place as well, but then we need to make sure that the fathers use those facilities as well. And that's where the personal responsibility comes in. And we talk about mothers going to work, but we should talk about young parents going to work. So the real participation, the real emancipation starts with the discussion at the kitchen table. Between husband and wife, how do you actually divide your tasks of caring for your family? And that's what we often forget, because we talk about moms going to work. Why don't we talk about fathers going to work?
Yeah, I mean, can I add to that? Because I think this is really important. I mean, I think the question is globally, 2/3 of the unpaid labor is being done by women. Right? The dishes and the garbage and is my diaper bag full? All of that is done, the cognitive labor is held, whether you're in India, Mozambique, Cairo, or Bronx, it's the same. And so we have to ask that question, well, why? And I think what you're saying is so important, because if you have policies, so for like in the United States, for example, we still have primary and secondary paid leave policies. Big multinational companies that are sitting right out there still offer 12 weeks for moms and 2 weeks for dads. So you're incentivizing the distribution of to not be equal at home. And so I do think it is a kitchen table conversation amongst partners, but it also, I put a challenge out there to companies to incentivize that, because oftentimes dads will say to me, well, if I work at a big financial services company and I take time off, I'm gaslit for it. I don't get a promotion. You know what I mean? I don't get that special opportunity. And so put promotions around it, put performance pays around it, right? Incentivize men in your company to actually take leave. Celebrate being a father.
I have quite a few young men working in my environment, And I tell them, I don't want to see you when you have a new
Yes.
baby. I don't want to see you on Friday or Wednesday or Tuesday, whatever your day off is. I don't want to see you that day. And I want you to take a month or 6 weeks off when your wife goes back to work. That's the most important time. That's the most important role you can play as a father, that you give the mother confidence to go back to work because you're at home.
And they want to do it. They want to be there with their kids.
There's a whole new generation who's
Absolutely.
embracing it.
I mean, I'm an employer too. So Education International, we have, staff from all over the world. I'm union, but one of the things as an American who's lived in Belgium for the last 12 years, and is that my the benefits for like the Scandinavian men, they split it with their partners.
Yeah.
So, and the Americans that are there go, how's that possible? And it's like, well, society, we just made a decision as a society, we're willing to pay for it because we didn't want women to be able to have to be staying home and missing out on all these kinds of things that Russ was talking about. So we just decided we're going to do that. But who did that? Oh, the unions. We decided it, we bargained for it, but we had full support. I mean, it's got massively popular ideas. I'm not sure the tax rates are massively popular all the time, but there's a cost to it. But I can tell you what I see, from my staff. If I think about the organization I worked with in the U.S. in terms of the benefits for them, the well-being, it's just night and day. And we are just, like President said, we're exceptionally bad at learning how to do things well and learning from the rest of the world because we think we're so exceptional.
Right.
So, I mean, but it can be done, and there are, like you said, there are places you can point to. But I just think labor also has a real part to play in all of this.
We haven't talked yet about, and we're quickly running out of time, but time flies when you're having fun. We haven't talked about the fact that a lot of this care can be provided by foreign workers. Yeah. That there are studies, actually by Michael Kremer, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, on Hong Kong, showing how nannies from the Philippines freed professional women in Hong Kong to join the labor market or to stay more significantly. And I know immigration policy in the rich countries has become increasingly more polemical, but I wonder what are the costs that are going to be paid by maintaining those or by strengthening those restrictions. Let me go to the public and let me ask for 2 quick questions from the audience just to hear from you. You can raise your hand if you have. Everybody's contributing to save time, so I think, yes? No, you have to wait because...
Thank you. Brad Olson, I'm an economist from New Zealand and one of the global shapers. I guess, it was really interesting to hear that there's both things that government, public policy can do, but also private businesses. Some of those tax changes, for example, take a lot of time. What would each of you want to see, or what would the one single thing that could be achieved in the next year be that would make the biggest change in this area, if I can?
Universal childcare.
Can you do that in a year?
I'm planning on it. Listen, I think that in the United States, for example, 85% of Republicans and Democrats agree that something needs to happen on childcare. It's not a political problem, right? So I think the opportunity here is to make sure that you have a large-scale movement of parents that are pushing for these policies, which we're building at Moms First. And second, you have Jamie Dimon be very clear with politicians and say, I need you to fix this. And so that building that momentum from the private sector, I think, is critical towards getting a change on childcare in America.
So let me bring this meeting to a close by pointing out some things that I think are clear. The first one is that our ability to work relies on the work of others. That it takes a village. And that part of the economy that is key to have a workforce is something that we take too much for granted. The slogan of the Harvard Union is, "You can't eat prestige." So we have to incur the real costs of providing the service. If it's an investment, it means that we are able to produce in the future thanks to the costs that have been incurred in us becoming who we are. That means that part of our income has to go to pay for those costs. So we need to tax ourselves too, because if those investments are productive, they will show up in what we earn, and consequently, with what we earn in the future, we have to pay back for those investments. I think that that's the right frame to think of them as investments. I think it's an area where demography is changing very quickly on us, both our domestic demography and global demography. These very, very large differences in population growth rates across the world will require some global reallocation of labor, where the process is becoming increasingly troubled. It's clear that there's a majority in the US in favor of doing something about immigration, but it never gets done. It never gets done. And so we may be walking into a serious problem that is not attention-grabbing the way wars are or the way hurricanes are, but they're not less important. So I thank the World Economic Forum for its leadership in this topic. It's a topic that is more important than it is urgent, but the urgent typically displaces the important. So thank you guys very much, and thank you for this meeting. Thank you all for coming.